Once again, the night of the tomahawks. Destination almost certainly is somewhere in or around Baghdad, 60 minutes away from here. A few hours earlier, a tranquil start to the evening on the forecastle as the chaplain holds a service.
It's a war that is just because the very fact when you have a person or a group of people on this planet that go against the very fiber of peace, that is a problem.
This morning, sleep is in short supply as the Mobile Bay and the 5th Fleet pound Iraq. I'm allowed on the bridge as the launchers gather pace.
Drop that up to your memory post.
Yes, sir.
Launching board.
We can't disclose how many cruise missiles are being fired. The smartest of these radar-dodging missiles can cost £1 million each, so it's not just high explosives America's hurling at Baghdad. Until now, the war seemed a touch remote for many on board this missile vessel, but the plight of the POWs has dramatically raised feelings and hardened attitudes.
Well, there's no question that when we saw that on the news, the crew is very concerned about the health and safety of their fellow fighting soldiers, so we're watching this with great interest.
Here in the Gulf, it's push-button warfare, but suddenly it's got personal a long way from the desert. Brian Barron, BBC News, on the USS Mobile Bay.
Scattered across the southern Iraqi desert, oil wells are burning. This was one of the first military targets, hard fighting for the vast Rumaila field. This is what was feared, wells destroyed by retreating Iraqi troops. But the speed of the Allied advance meant only a handful were set alight before the southern oil fields were secure.
This was a very important task for us to capture intact, and therefore the speed of it and the fact that we've captured so much of it intact has been a very successful operation.
There is tension here. The British and American troops know they could come under attack. There is still fighting in the northern part of this oil field. But 60% of the Iraqi reserves are here. The war rages on, but civilian oilmen have already arrived.
I think it's going to take quite a bit of work. You can look around you and see how run down things have gotten over the years. This could be in 5-10 years' time, probably one of the premier oil fields in the entire world.
Fires are burning, but the darkened skies that marked the last Gulf War have so far been avoided.
Capturing the oil fields intact was always seen as a central issue. Coalition forces say these burning wells can be dealt with within a matter of weeks, that this crucial resource has been protected for whatever follows this war. Richard Bilton, BBC News, Southern Iraq.
Several days and show you some images of some of the initial strikes that we've had against forces throughout central and eastern Iraq primarily, and the effect that we're having on those combat systems. I'll talk several times to the graphics today, and if you'll bear with me while I point at some things, you should be able to see it very clearly. Let's go ahead and bring up the first set of weapon system videos, please. What we're going to show you is a series of attacks. All of these are done from the air. They're all precision engagements with precision-guided munitions against armored formations, against command post bunkers, and against other things that you'll see like aircraft that have been moved into strange places. This first one is a MiG, a fighter jet that was towed away from the Al-Assad airfield and was hidden in a revetted area. So you'll see that being struck on the ground. Go ahead and roll the tape, please. We have found a number of these aircraft in a variety of places, including in some cases near cemeteries. The second image is an airfield command bunker complex in eastern Iraq. Go ahead and roll the tape. As I mentioned, we're also attacking combat systems that are in defensive and revetted positions. The next one is an armored personnel carrier that we'll bring up and show in just a moment. And this armored personnel carrier is in a defensive position in central Iraq. Next, there's an image of a tank in a similar position in central Iraq. And finally, one last combat vehicle, a tank in this case again, in central Iraq. General Frank spoke to you a few days ago about the effort we go through to do precision engagement in all we do. First, to be very precise about what it is we're targeting, how we choose to target it, and also to minimize the effects on things we don't intend to attack. I'm going to show you a series of before and after images from different regime targets that have been attacked over the last several days, just to demonstrate the nature of that effectiveness and let you see it for yourself. Let's bring up the first image, please. This is a complex for the Special Security Organization, well known as the enforcement arm of the regime. You can see the compound is outlined on the screen, and the portion to be attacked is on the lower left side, and we'll show that before and after, and then a split view so that you can get oriented to it. I will tell you that the next image, the post-strike, has been rotated. Let's go ahead and show the next, please, post-strike. It's rotated about 90 degrees, but you can see where the attacks occurred with effectiveness at each of the blue arrows, and only those buildings have been affected. Everything around the outside of the camp is unaffected. Even the walls of the compound, the compound are not affected. And the split, please. The before, pre-strike, and after. Let me give you another example. The Iraqi Intelligence Service, the arm that ties to terrorism throughout the world and conducts intelligence operations abroad. This complex is in the center of the screen, and you'll see a post-strike image here in just a moment. Let's bring it up. Again, the surrounding area is intact, and only those buildings that were targeted have been destroyed. Another example. The Palace Guard, part of the regime's protective structure. This is a barracks and office complex. It was attacked by precision-guided munitions. Let's show the post-strike, please. Each one of those blue arrows represents a different weapon that was delivered against the target set. And different from the old days, we don't bring multiple aircraft in. We may send a specific missile or a specific guided weapon system against each one of those points to achieve the desired effect. And the split. Our attacks, particularly in the Baghdad area and other built-up areas against regime targets, continue to be very effective, and we remain committed to minimizing the potential effects on the people of Iraq and also the infrastructure. Let me now give you an update on some additional actions. General Franks mentioned that Coalition Special Operations Forces continue to conduct numerous missions throughout Iraq. They're actively hunting for weapons of mass destruction and also looking for ballistic missile systems. And they're on track, and they're doing exactly what they need to be doing at this point. On the next image, we'll show a map just to give you a highlight of where some of our recent operational activity has been. Each one of these pointers shows where the key highlights are. First, the land component did continue to expand its territory throughout Iraq, and that included a continued advance beyond Al-Naziriyah and also an aviation attack against Republican Guard forces near Baghdad. And during that attack, there was an attack helicopter downed. All the other helicopters involved in the mission did accomplish the mission and returned safely to base. Land component also secured Basra Airport, all of the Rumaila oil field, and an ammunition storage area near An-Najaf. The pointers show where those key activities are. Okay, change to the next image, please. This is a video that was filmed as we were doing mine-countermine operations in the Khor Abdullah to try to open the way to Qasr, make it possible for humanitarian supplies and other needed things to go in. This is a helicopter towing a mine sled. We do anticipate that there may have been mines laid. No confirmation of that as we continue to go. It's a very deliberate process. And the map shows where we've achieved at this point in time. Go ahead and bring the map up, please. The area that should be involved is down to the south of Basra at the mouth of the Khor Abdullah. We've got the wrong image up here. All right, bring up the next image, please. One of the things we've done throughout, I mentioned a few days ago, an important line for us is using information and as much as possible communicating with the Iraqi people and Iraqi military forces and informing them with information that indeed will save their lives and has already on a number of occasions. I want to show you a few of the leaflets that we've used and tell you that at this point in time we've already released over 28 million leaflets, and that accounts for roughly 5 million more than all of which were dropped in Desert Storm. Each one of them has a different theme. It's targeted to specific areas, whether it is to a unit or to the population. In this particular case, it's a warning to units that they should abandon their equipment or the equipment would be destroyed. And we certainly saw that in the first few days. Next, please. We also emphasize to them that their future is tied to their economy and that they should not do things like dump oil, with the anticipation that some of the oil fields and also the oil terminals might have been damaged. This we communicated to the Iraqi people. They should not squander their future by way of dumping oil in waterways. The next one, please. Capitulation instructions and how to signal to us that they're ready for us not to attack, and as we arrive, to either surrender or capitulate. This is a graphic image. It joined with radio broadcast that gave very specific information on how to do that, so we did not have a problem. And that has not been a problem at this point. Bring up the next image, please. As you know, we conducted initial operations to secure the Rumaila oil fields and the terminals that are inside of the North Arabian Gulf, as well as the Al-Fa terminal. Those operations were successful, but indeed there were some examples of the regime having set demolitions on wellheads and blowing them. Yesterday, the assessment team that needs to go in and determine what work needs to be done was able to enter into Iraq, do an assessment of the oil field, and has already shut down a gas oil separation plant, and that turned one of the fires off by itself. So we're down at this point to only 7 fires out of an oil field that has 500 wellheads. Again, a very, very important story for the future of Iraq.
You bet, Jim. We can't tell you specifically where we are, other than to say we're outside Qasr, and that there was a brief firefight that was going on, and there have been some Iraqi men who have surrendered. With some of the specific details I have with me, Lieutenant Pandak, First Lieutenant Pandak, can you just give me a quick briefing on what's been going on?
Out here?
Yeah.
Yeah, when we came up and set into some defensive positions, and as we were set in, we went ahead. We took fire from them, so we went ahead and turned fire. Had some of their folks surrender, and now apparently some of their people are moving back into the buildings. So they would say they surrender, and then they'll run back into the buildings. We're trying to figure out who's who and make sure that we're not, make sure that we don't shoot civilians, but those folks that are military but aren't in uniform, we're going to go ahead and take care of them.
You've seen some civilians out there, correct?
Yes, you can tell the civilians usually, even if they're not in uniform. You can tell who the civilians.
And how does that complicate the situation for you?
It complicates it greatly because according to the rules, basically of war and such that we're trained in, you're supposed to be wearing a uniform. You notice we're all wearing uniforms and such, but they're going ahead and throwing on civilian clothing. That makes our life a lot harder because it's of course we're here not to hurt the Iraqi people or whatever. But if Iraqi soldiers are wearing the civilian clothing, it just makes it that much harder on the Marines to figure out who's who and make sure they're doing the right thing.
They put up the white flag pretty quickly. Were you surprised by that?
No, not really. That's kind of their. That's how they operate. They'll take shots at us, then they'll run up the white flag, and then once we stop shooting, they'll run away to shoot at us from another position. It's getting kind of frustrating.
Royal Marines are practicing some of the survival skills they honed in Northern Ireland, except that they didn't have A-10 tank busters to help them there. This was on the Al-Faw Peninsula, supposedly liberated on the first day. That's the uneven pattern of the American and British advance into southern Iraq. Now an area is secure, and then it isn't. The myth of the casualty-free war has been exploded. The US Marines are reported to have lost 10 men in combat, taking 2 bridges over the Euphrates at the city of Nasiriyah in south-central Iraq. The city itself has not been completely taken. The lines of advance are stretched thin, and the strain is showing, but American commanders remain confident.
Progress toward our objectives has been rapid and in some cases dramatic. Demining operations have cleared about half of the channel up to Qasr. Our forces have met sporadic resistance in a number of places on the battlefield.
The Americans showed images of targets before and after. This was about to be a former armoured personnel carrier. There will be no battle for Basra. Challenger tanks of the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards have moved to blocking positions outside the city. The Iraqis are not beaten, and the British are aware of the possibility of a counterattack. The first British combat death was reported this afternoon. Most of the wounded are lightly hurt, but 2 British soldiers are missing. The best case scenario for the British hasn't happened. Neither has the worst case scenario. The Royal Marines of 4-2 Commando, among others, face a long slog ahead, digging in, fighting back, guarding prisoners.
The men are all in one piece, Smiley. One lad's fractured his leg. We got him out in a helicopter in very short order. The boys are in good fettle.
The 3-nation coalition now includes Australian special forces. There are secret operations in the north and west of Iraq, main force units within 60 miles of the capital, and of course, American bombers above it. Martin Bell, 5 News.
As we understand it, there's a lot of activity where you are. Can you tell us what's happening?
Well, there is a continued battle for control of 2 bridges that lead from the south to the north through Nasiriyah. You have the first bridge that crosses the Euphrates and the second bridge that crosses the Saddam Canal. Now, the battle has been for control of those bridges because the road that leads north is where the 1st Marine Division is going to come through. Some of them made it through when those 2 bridges were in control of the U.S. Marines. But when they've lost control of the bridges, and most notably this second bridge, it's backed up the 1st Marine Division's movements north. And of course, one would assume that they're heading in the direction of Baghdad because the highway heads up generally in that direction. So these 2 bridges are fierce fights because the U.S. military has gone in there with their patrols, but there are civilians in the area, so there's very little that they can do to engage a lot of the enemy, because the enemy is in this urban area and they're hiding inside of buildings, on rooftops, in windows, and in many cases they're not even wearing uniforms themselves. They're out mingling among the civilians, and so the Marines are finding it difficult. They can't simply open up fire because they'll kill a lot of civilians in the process. So there are these Iraqi soldiers who've taken positions. They're basically taking pot shots at the Marines. The U.S. Marines have been lobbing in a fair amount of artillery in areas where they believe that these soldiers may be holed up and that there are no civilians, but it's pretty clear that that's a less exact approach, and so there have been some civilian wounded and some civilian killed as a result of that. So the real approach here is to go in and try and take them out one by one. It's a very long, slow process, especially in a city that's the 7th largest city in Iraq, 300,000 people. There are Marine snipers that have now moved into the area, and they hope to exact some sort of control in the area. And the last point I might note here is that those Iraqi soldiers that are filling in amongst the civilians, at one point even encouraging women and children just to take to the streets so that it filled up the streets. They're actually now holed up in one building, which the U.S. Marines have determined is a hospital, so it's particularly difficult for them to return fire at the hospital.
Prisoners under guard by the road to Basra, remnants of the Iraqi 51st Division. Here are their tanks, some hit, some just abandoned. And this was one of the division's barracks. Littered across the sand, eloquent evidence of the panic and desperation of their departure. But when the Irish Guards arrived here this morning, they found that the local people had got here before them. They were mainly scavenging for food, water and petrol, but some of them were carting off guns and ammunition.
The gun culture of this is something that we've got to be careful of. I mean, we accept the fact that it's part of their culture to have weapons, but obviously these sort of weapons are slightly more serious.
With the vast American force getting sucked towards Baghdad, there's a danger of a power vacuum being created here in its wake, which the local people will understandably try to exploit. It's the British Army that has to fill the hole the advancing Americans have left behind, and British soldiers who must ensure stockpiles of surrendered military weapons don't end up arming the civilian population. Catherine Jones, Southern Iraq, 5 News.
Most now anxious to voice their support for their new occupiers.
Yes, George Bush, okay.
And when the oil starts to flow again, it will be American engineers who turn on the pumps. But profits from the oil, they insist, will go towards rebuilding the country. Tim Ewart, ITV News, Southern Iraq.
Sea entered a critical phase today with Royal Navy and US ships embarking on a dangerous mission to clear the estuary near Qasr of Iraqi mines. They're using new equipment and tactics. This is the first time television cameras have been allowed to film this highly sensitive operation. Specially converted remote-controlled boats are being employed to tow these long orange magnets which set off any metal-sensitive mines. The boats are steered from a console on the mothership.
Whiskey 1, Sierra has control.
They use a high-tech satellite tracking system, meaning there's nobody aboard, so minimising the risk of casualties.
Well, here's the proof it works. The boat we're on now is being remotely controlled by the mothership, which is some distance away. And incredibly, the Royal Navy says this system has a range of several miles.
It's been designed specifically for mine clearing off the Iraqi coast.
Because of the unique situation we're going to be working in, where the water is very shallow, it's very murky, very poor underwater visibility, and there are high tidal streams, our existing systems just can't cope with those sort of situations.
The mine hunters also have specialist divers aboard who can investigate suspicious objects, in effect carrying out underwater bomb disposal. And there are mini submarines equipped with underwater cameras which can send back images to a control room. The Royal Navy thinks the Iraqis have deployed mines in abundance. The race is now on to find them so humanitarian aid can be shipped in. Dan Rivers, ITV News in the northern Persian Gulf.
The coalition's problem that as US troops advance on Najaf, just 100 miles south of Baghdad now, they're leaving significant pockets of resistance behind them. British sources claiming that by Tuesday the capital will be within striking range. But the closer they get, the tougher the battles may become, the greater the risk of a last-ditch chemical attack. Further south, outside Basra, coalition tanks are still under fire, even though we were told an Iraqi division had supposedly surrendered here 2 days ago.
The third British air accident in as many days. An RAF Tornado was shot down. Its 2 crew are missing, victims of what the military politely calls friendly fire.
A detailed investigation is underway, so we must not rush to judge. We need to establish exactly how this happened so we can take steps to minimise the risks in the future. But we have checked our current procedures and we are satisfied.
Hundreds of millions of pounds have been spent trying to reduce the risk of friendly fire from Patriot missile batteries and other high-tech weapons. The exact cause of today's deaths isn't clear, but attention will focus on the controversial recognition system installed in every piece of battlefield equipment. All American and British planes, including Tornadoes, are fitted with a system called IFF, Identification Friend or Foe. When these planes are challenged by their own side, they send back electronic codes which show they're friendly. But for some reason, the IFF system failed to work. The Patriot decided the jet was hostile and shot it down.
Wow. I hope that was the right thing to do. Me too.
Questions too tonight for the MOD, criticised by the National Audit Office last year for introducing IFF too slowly, and perhaps most critically for failing to make it fully compatible with American weaponry.
Encountered them, they destroyed 4 tanks, they killed a number of their mercenaries, injured another number, and the rest flew like rats.
South of Baghdad, and the Americans are getting closer by the day to their final destination. But in Najaf, as elsewhere along the way, they have encountered fierce resistance. The American nightmare here is US troops getting bogged down in small-town Iraq.
A massive explosion has been heard near Saddam Hussein's Republican Palace. Several buildings are ablaze and smoke is enveloping parts of the city.
War came to northern Iraq in earnest today, in the gigantic shape of an American B-52. Its target, the Iraqi front line near Mosul, close to the Kurdish positions. For the Kurds, it was a welcome sign that the Americans were finally turning their attention here to the northern front. But it was after dark, as the night's bombing raids on Kirkuk and Mosul started, that we saw the unmistakable signs of battle. At first, it looked like the long-awaited offensive by Kurdish troops and American special forces. Yet the direction of the firing seemed odd. It ought either to have been towards us or away from us, not across our line of vision. And then, after an hour, the fierce interchanges died away. It's impossible for us at this distance to be certain about who was fighting whom. So what we're going to do is to drive down this road, down to the village at the end there. You can probably see the lights of it in our night sight, and find out from the Kurdish commander who's based there what the battle was all about. He insisted the Kurds weren't even involved. A big group of Iraqi soldiers were trying to desert, he said, and were attacked by Saddam loyalists. The deserters were defeated in the crossfire we'd seen. For the Kurds, it's a sign that Iraqi morale is really low, and they're even more impatient to take them on. John Simpson, BBC News.
The flag of surrender was displayed, and it was followed up by artillery fire. In another incident, there were troops dressed in civilian clothes that appeared to welcome the forces and then ambush them.
And this is one answer to Iraqi resistance. As B-52s returned to their base in Gloucestershire this evening, Allied commanders were ordering more airstrikes to help the advance on the ground.